or another require the support of the state?
Well, it's a tough call, but I've got to go with the housing spokesperson first. I call the honourable member Philip Twyford.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I guess it's axiomatic that the titles of bills like this are somewhat euphemistic, but the Social Housing Reform, Housing Restructuring and Tenancy Matters Amendment Bill doesn't really do it justice, Mr Chairman. And anyone listening to this debate will know by now that Labor members feel very strongly about the changes in this bill, that we protest what we see as a running down, a winding back and a sort of dividing up and handing around of the parts of a much diminished Housing New Zealand. And you can ask, sir, why is this important? And it's important because for generations in this country, people have believed that it is a core responsibility of the state to put a decent roof over the heads of people who cannot afford to buy their own home or who cannot afford even decent rental accommodation. It's one of the institutions built up by our forebears with the express purpose of giving every child in this country the best possible start in life, no matter what side of town they grow up and what their parents do for a living. And it's not perfect by any means, but we believe on this side of the House that in the 21st century it is still a vital role not only to ensure the funding of, but for the government to deliver state and social housing as a key way that we can level the playing field for all New Zealanders. And if there's one lesson from the disastrous decade of the 1990s, that is that when the state withdraws from housing policy and from the provision of housing and simply focuses on incomes policy, it was an utter disaster. And the policy of market rents in the 90s had terribly damaging social consequences for a whole generation of the children of the poor in this country, and we are still dealing with the consequences. A state house is not just a temporary roof over someone's head in a time of need. It's a place to call home for people who cannot afford to buy and own their own home. And in the current market, there are many, many people who should a generation ago naturally have expected that being unable to buy their own home, to afford that, they could have had the security and the safety of a state house. But because successive national governments have wound down and sold off the housing stock, we have a pitifully small social housing stock in this country compared to other countries that we usually compare ourselves to. 4% of the population have a roof over their heads from state or social housing. Well, the reason that we oppose this bill so strongly is that we believe, contrary to the Minister's explanation, that he's simply trying to bring in community housing providers. This is in fact part of a systematic pattern of cutting back, winding down and dismembering Housing New Zealand, and so we protest very strongly about that. So I don't know what would be a suitable name. The winding down of Housing New Zealand bill, the final solution for Housing New Zealand, thanks to the National Party. It's not an exaggeration to say that this is the end of Housing New Zealand as we know it, and maybe that's a better title for this bill, sir. It is a direct threat to the very existence of Housing New Zealand as a government-delivered vehicle for social housing for people who cannot afford to either rent quality housing or to own their own homes. So, sir, that is in a nutshell why we are so strongly against this bill. It's not because we are opposed to community housing organisations having more involvement or having access to the income-related rent subsidy, or in fact having housing stock transferred across to them. We do not believe that the intent of this minister and this bill is a bigger, stronger, better state and social housing sector. In fact, we believe it is quite the opposite. And if you put this bill and the minister's policies, the government's policies, in context, then I'm sure most people would agree.
I call the Honourable Annie